And this is really, it's just a subclass of UI view controller. So you can push it on to your stack just like any other video or any other view controller. You feed it the path. You feed it the maximum duration that you want it to be. And then you just hit go. You push it. And what will come out the other end will depend on the delegate methods. So the user will have all the trimming API that they have with the cameras app. And once they hit save, it'll call you back to save that to disk. And the actual function you use to save escapes me, but it's like UI image video save video at path video or something like that, right? Yeah, it was really, really long. It escapes my mind. But all right, and you can find out when it failed, and you can find out when the user canceled as well. Right, that's actually it for video. Right, there's only those two classes, and of course the UI image picker controller for actually doing the recording. So the last thing I want to talk about is how do you embed application settings into your app? How are we for time? 10 minutes. OK. So applications, as you well know, there's a settings app on the device, and each application can actually register a bundle that becomes its settings in the settings app. The trick with settings is to do it sparingly, right? So you don't want your users flipping back and forth between your application in order to go toggle some settings. In fact, if you look at the way Apple writes their apps, the settings, unless you're talking about mail where there's a lot of configuration, the settings tend to be pretty minimal. What I encourage you to do is if you're thinking about settings for behavior, is to come up with the right behavior and dictate. That's the way it's going to be. But if you're looking at settings for configuration, for user configuration, that's kind of more appropriate for what you want to put in settings. Right? Don't put in every switch just because it's available. Maybe you want to do this for debugging. You don't want to do this for shipping apps. Well, how do you build these, right? So there are two ways to go about putting settings in your app, right? Number one is to put it in the settings app, right? These are default behavior overrides, and they're things that you don't want your users changing that often. In fact, they probably have some preference of the way it's going to behave. They'll want to set it up once and leave it that way. All right, again, examples are mail account information, right? I'm not going to change my mail accounts frequently. And Safari search, well, do you want Yahoo or do you want Google, right? You choose once, and it's that way until you decide sometime down the road you want to change your mind. The other way you can do these is you can embed the settings in your application itself, right? And you see this a lot more with games where you're changing, let's say, audio effects settings. You want to turn on and off the volume. You want to turn on and off sound effects. You want to turn on and off the background music. You want to set the volume, stuff like that. Those things you would want to put in your application. And actually, a couple of advantages and disadvantages here is that if you put it in the settings app, you're not running code when people are changing those settings. It's actually going to set values in NS user defaults for you to fetch. Versus if you put it in your application, well, it uses up UI space. That's a disadvantage. But you can actually run code when people hit the different buttons. If you want to put it in the settings app, you create a settings bundle. And I'll show you how to do this in a moment. Again, for really infrequent stuff, you can put it also in the back of the main view, right? So you can flip over your view. There's actually a flip transition. Right, stocks and weather does this. That's another place to put settings. And I think there's even an info button that UIKit provides to you. So if you want to do that flip, you just embed that button and tell it to start that transition. All right, so let's talk about the settings bundle itself. When you create a settings bundle, it starts with a root.plist. Okay, and that root.plist specifies a hierarchy of settings. And the settings are predefined, so you can have different types, right? You can have a slider type, you can have a switch type, you can have a group type, or I believe it's called multi-value. for when you know, let's say you have 3 options you want the user to choose from, and to get there, they step through one level to see the 3 options. When they choose one, it steps back. That's a multi-value type. And you do this all by modifying your plist, right? By modifying this plist and giving it identifiers for each of these items, you have a codeless way of getting settings from your users through the settings app. Here are the different types that they have. So there's a title, which is really just a text string. There's a text field. So let's say you wanted, I don't know, you want to change their username, or you want to change some prompt that they see every time they launch. Toggle switch, slider, multi-value I described already. Group is similar to, it's another step-in kind of hierarchy thing, but you can have other controls in there. And child pane, of course, comes from a group. Each of the items have keys associated with it. And the keys are how you reference them inside your app, and you specify those keys. So really quick, this is actually the last thing I've got for today. I'm just going to create a settings plist, and I'm going to show you how to modify that to get what you want. So what we're going to do, if you control click, or you can go into File, New File, there's a template set up for you. So if you go into iPhone OS, Resource, you can choose Settings Bundle. We'll hit OK. And we'll call it Settings Bundle. There it is, right? The only file we care about in here, if you want to do localization, which we'll talk about, I think, in a couple of classes, you can do that. But we're just going to look at the root.plist. So by default, this is what it creates for you. There's a group, right? That group has a text field that allows input. You'll notice there are a few different fields here that you can fill out. You can say whether that's secure. So let's say that's secure. We're going to change the title of this to password. And we're going to change the key of this to password preference. You know, different keyboard types, which we saw with the text input stuff. You know, here's an example of a switch. Here's an example of a slider. Nothing too crazy here. Let's give it a name at least. So title, our slider. Actually, we have a title. We have a title here, so we're going to say enabled. Let's call this our switch. What happens is when you create a settings bundle, it gets embedded in your application. And when the user downloads that application from the App Store, the first thing that Springboard does, Springboard's the launcher app, is it checks for that settings bundle, and it actually puts that in settings for you. So you don't have to run any code to install it. It just gets installed for you as long as that settings bundle is there. So I'm going to run only so that we can compile and put it in the bundle. All right, so if we go into settings now, that should have gotten registered. And here we are, the AVW samples app. And I've got this password text field, which should, you can't see my password. I have a switch and I have a slider, right? Each of these I can get the value from in my app. So just to show you really quick, I'm going to save this. I'm actually just going to quit. And we're going to modify our application so that we take the password preference, and I'm going to make my password visible. So we go into, let's go into our audio view and just put a text field there. Library. Let's just put a label here. And we'll point to it, and then we'll load the preference, and you'll see what happens. So I'm going to put an IB outlet, UI text, UI label, password field. And what we'll do is in our view did load, we'll get that preference, and we'll just set that as the text. So do I already have a view did load? I don't think so. So view did load. We're going to say, what was it? Password field dot text equals NS user defaults